those are the quick announcements. If you haven't set your DVR for Tuesday and Wednesday of next week on PBS, you must see this documentary, Henry Louis Gates, The Black Church. This is our story. This is our song. It's so good. I've seen big chunks of it. There have been, but the other piece I want to stress for those of us on the Gather front is we are going to see a lot of friendly and familiar faces. Here are people that have put this boat in the water and prayed this boat through the water and keep us in good hands. When I was looking at the preview, my heart just kept swelling up there. If there will be our presiding bishop at Gather, Bishop Yvette Flunder, is interviewed in it. Reverend Otis Moss III is in it. Renita Weems, who is one of my great, and Kelly Brown Douglas. Kelly Brown Douglas was an important influence in my thesis work. Renita Weems, I have spent hours with. She's in there. Yolanda Adams, who I knew when she was a teenager, is there. There's a shot of Henry Louis Gates standing in my church in LA, in West Angeles, so he must go back to West Angeles. I know he was all over Chicago. I know he was at Trinity. He also went to City of Refuge. So those of us that know Andrew Jameson, very likely we will probably see shots of Andrew playing the piano at Bishop Flunder's church. So this is like old home week for a lot of stuff, all right? And you're going to hear great preaching and great music and great stories. So on PBS, it's on Tuesday and Wednesday at 8 o'clock. All right, and there's also an accompanying book, which I don't have yet, but set your DVRs. It's going to be magnificent, I promise you. Next week, we start our Lenten series, and we are going to spend the next 5 weeks breaking down the last week of Jesus's earthly life, which traditionally is thought of as the Passion. Reverend Dr. Joanne Terrell from our seminary, Shay and my seminary, will be joining Shay and me for some conversations that we'll run here, and then she's going to be with us live during her reading week, which I believe is March 18th. She's teaching tonight at the seminary, even while we're teaching here, so she can't be both places at once. So the compromise is, when she came to me, she said, I want to teach the Passion at Gather, and it was like, well, okay, that's an easy yes. And so then, but then when we looked at the schedule, it was like, okay, well, what we'll have to do is we'll have to do some video work and some live work. And she is famous for a book that she wrote that continues to raise a lot of controversy, called Power in the Blood, the Cross and the African-American Experience. And she's got a question mark there. She wants to know what that means. And it's a book that looks at atonement and what the death of Jesus means, particularly in light of Black liberation theology. Joanne was Dr. James Cone's research assistant when he was writing Black liberation theology and the cross and the lynching tree and all of that stuff. She was with him at Union Seminary. So all of the stuff that Jeremiah Wright says, all of the stuff that Raphael Warnock says, Raphael Warnock preached at Jim Cone's funeral, and Joanne was a singer there. I mean, it's all that kind of stuff. So she comes with a lot of cred. Our guide will be Marcus Borg and John Dominic Croissant's book, The Last Week. And if you haven't got that, it's a wonderful, wonderful read. And so you can get both of these books on Amazon. Joanne's book is a little more on the difficult level because she's writing, it's surely a theological treatise. Borg and Croissant are much more accessible. I'm not to say anything about anybody in the class, but I struggled to get through some of Joanne's stuff. So there you go. So, and then finally, last Sunday of the month, Russell is working on the music now. He will be sending out the music. We'll be sending out some worship instructions in the last little bit. This will be our last Sunday in February. We'll do a Black History Month service, but we're going to concentrate on love. It's going to be the theme of it. So we're pulling two things together there. Start now inviting your friends. I'll try to get the invitation up on the Facebook page very quickly here. Now we're going to play a game. Let's play binaries. I want us, because that's a word we're hearing a whole lot of, and we're going to play binaries with a bunch of words that we hear a lot. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them up, and I'm going to give you guys, I'm going to count to 15, and then I'm going to stop the share so we can all get in the screen and see each other. And we're going to just kind of go one by one and kind of play play binaries. What's the binary to this one? What is because we think in pairs. We tend to think everything in twos. So here's some words I want to see what we think about. And then I'm just going to call them out one by one. We don't have time tonight to do this waiting game. Just start talking, okay? So here we go. Binary, let's play binaries. To democracy, truth, beauty, freedom, faith. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Give me a binary to democracy. Let's talk to that. What would it be?
Authoritarianism.
Authoritarianism. Okay, what else?
Hierarchy.
Hierarchy, okay.
Hierarchy.
Injustice.
Injustice, okay, good. How about truth?
Fascism.
I'm sorry, say what?
Fascism.
Fascism, there you go. That's absolutely. How about how are we doing with truth?
Falsehood.
Falsehood, okay. What else we got?
Lie.
Lies.
Lies. I'm sorry, Linda, you said something?
No, I just said lies, like everybody.
Lies, yeah.
Deception.
There you go. That was waiting for deception to show up. Yep. All right.
Omission.
Omission. There you go. How about beauty?
Ugly.
Ugly, yeah.
Hateful.
Hateful, okay.
Yeah.
I'm
Horror.
sorry.
Empty.
I'm sorry, I
Scary.
missed you.
Horror. Horror.
Okay, I missed Jane Ann's word. What did you say, Jane Ann? I'm sorry.
I said empty.
Empty. There you go.
Because I don't like to think of, that's what I said.
Gotcha.
Forever. A
Marcella?
thing of beauty is a joy forever.
So the opposite of beauty might be sorrow, right? Yeah.
No.
Marcella, did you have something? You're muted, love. No? No? How about freedom?
Bondage.
Slavery.
Bondage? I'm sorry, again?
Slavery.
Slavery. All right. How about faith? What's the opposite of faith?
Entrapment.
Oh, okay. There you go. Freedom and
Doubt.
trust. That's good. Okay, faith. Go to the other side. What'd somebody say?
Doubt.
Doubt. There you go.
Except you can't have faith without doubt. The opposite of faith is surety.
Is
Being
surety.
sure and positive.
Oh, there you go.
Right. Yeah.
Trust.
Very good. Very good.
Wow. Good.
Yeah. Faith
Surety.
is
I like that.
mistrust. Yep.
Disbelief.
Surety.
Disbelief. There you go.
Surety. Yeah.
Agnosticism.
Narcissism.
There you go.
Agnosticism.
Oh,
Agnosticism.
agnosticism. Okay. There you go. Or narcissism.
Cynicism. What are those systems?
So, I mean, Lisa, what did you say? I'm sorry.
Cynicism.
Cynicism. Very good. I'm sharing again. Here we go. Can you all see again? We're good?
Yes.
The thing about binaries is that it keeps pushing us into extremes. It keeps pushing us into places where we want to nail things down. The problem with binaries is that oh, I'm sorry, let me back up. Oh, come on.
False
I'm showing off my
equivalencies.
lesson.
That's
Binaries
good.
keep wanting us to define something by what it's not. That's the struggle that you have with binaries. That's why I'm very interested in particularly young people today who've decided that they have labeled their gender as non-binary. And I know that that throws everybody for a loop, you know, those of us that are above a certain age, what does that mean? And I think really what it means is I refuse to be identified by what I'm not. And that's a very powerful idea. But it's also an idea that because we are historically, particularly people in a Western tradition, we have been schooled and trained to think of life as binaries. And one of the big binaries that we always hear a lot about is faith and science, right? It's always, we have been set up mostly by a creationist movement to be taught that faith is in conflict with science. But I've been thinking a whole lot about this. And so I'm going to apologize if I'm a little, slow me down if I get, because I've been thinking about this a whole lot. I've been wondering about the relationship between science and art. Science and art, and how are they connected? Because I think that that might give us a better understanding of what faith is in a weird kind of way. And so there are things about science that we just assume. We understand that science can be comprehended, right? We talk about comprehension a whole lot. And science can be fully or nearly understood. It is explainable. Why does ice melt? Because heat causes what? All of the molecules that are frozen so closely together to loosen up, and all of a sudden they're free to flow out, and it's water. We learned that in second, third grade. I understand that, I get that. Why does it rain? Because a whole lot of moisture gathers in the sky until it's too heavy and it's got to fall out of it. I get that, okay? So science is comprehended, but art is apprehended. And I love this because we have placed values against this. But by apprehension, what we mean,
Who's the philosopher?
right, it is this idea that apprehension is something that is fully or nearly experienced, but it's still inexplicable. Why are you feeling that way? I don't know. Why did that movie make you cry? I really don't know. Why does the Eroica Symphony make you jump to your feet? I don't know. Why is it whenever I hear dum, 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 all of a sudden I don't know. Because art is apprehended. And if you look at it, we always think of something as comprehensive as being complete. We think of being apprehensive as a negative quality. And we're going to get into why that is. But science is measurable. Obviously, that's all we do is measure science. If you're a Jeopardy fan, there's usually a science measurement column at least once every 3 games. But art can't be quantified. Science is logical. It's about cause and effect. Art is intuitive. There's an impulse and we respond. The artist has the impulse, we respond. Sometimes there's an impulse that draws us to certain kinds of art. There's a reason why I am impulsively drawn to certain kinds of music, because I respond a certain kind of way to that music, right? Science is about objective knowing. Art is about subjective belief. And that's a big issue in art, because when you get into theory and criticism of art, part of the subjective belief is that we are projecting intention and understanding and consciousness on the artist. This is what Picasso was trying to show us. We don't know what Picasso was trying to show us. This is what Jackson Pollock was doing. I don't know. But we do this, and it's always filtered out of our own consciousness. Science settles and defines things. Art should, if it's doing its job, should trouble and raise questions, right? Science is intellectual and rational, but art is always instinctive. And I want to be very clear. I want you to understand this: sensual. Art affects our senses. Is this making sense to everybody?
Yeah.
So science and art live in different houses. Now, this became problematic for a lot of folks with Enlightenment, with the Age of Enlightenment. And as Western European folks and as good Protestants, we love the Age of Enlightenment, because part of the Protestant ethos is a rational ethos. Reason is always stuck in the middle of that, right? And so we love the Enlightenment, but there are some detriments that have been kind of invade on our faith because of the Enlightenment. And I want us to understand that we, in matters of faith, we are dealing with 2 ages of enlightenment. All right, as people as believers of the Abrahamic tradition, we could say the Age of Enlightenment goes from the time of Abraham to the time of Muhammad. There is a time where things are happening, where people are coming into a new kind of understanding of themselves and the world and consciousness and society and justice that's moved away from pure tribalism into much more demands on us based on moral and spiritual needs, right? And so you get this idea that comes forth in 1 Peter, this wonderful quote that I love over and over again. You have become this people so that you may speak of the wonderful acts of the one who called you out of darkness into his amazing light. This idea of, I am the light of the world. A city that's, do not put your light under a candle. There are all of these things that come to us out of the New Testament that are always about light. In the Hebrew Bible, the Spirit of God precedes the children of Israel in the wilderness in a what? A pillar of light and a firelight. Fire goes in front of them. That's what they are following. How does Moses get called to go get them? There is a fire that lights their way. There is a fire that burns always on the altar. There is all of this sense of light that goes on in there in a very literal, but also very kind of a spiritual, a metaphysical sense. And then you get the age of enlightenment, which, you know, we really love in America because so many of our founders were very enlightened. And then you get writers like Kant. And I love Kant's idea here. He says enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-imposed nonage, which really means sort of adolescence. Nonage is the inability to use one's own understanding without another's guidance. So for Kant, enlightenment means that we can think without supervision. Now, there are reasons why this is going on, that we can work it out, that this idea of non-age or known-age, this idea that we're sort of, until we learn to understand without guidance, we're just sort of stumbling around being told all the things that you tell your teenagers, right? Be home by 9, eat your green beans, you know, all that kind of stuff. Don't take candy from strangers, all that. Kant and the Enlightenment masters, and I'm being highly reductive here, I'm not doing a class in Enlightenment, their big thing is to tell us that, you know what, grow up, just grow up. That is enlightenment. It is a growing up. I'll step outside to tell a story. I have a relative who is, to this day is still a trumpeter, who called me I don't know, 3 days into the new administration to say, so Biden's raising your taxes. And I just said, well, you know, Biden can't raise my taxes. That requires an act of Congress, but thank you for the alert. I'll watch out. I'm happy that we get some taxes raised because we got some people in trouble. We got to spend some money. I'm not worried about Biden raising my taxes. Well, this is terrible. You know, this isn't the American way. It's like, no, it's sort of the American way. We take care of our people, and that's the way it works. And then I just said, I don't know how you think this country is going to run if we don't pay taxes. And I couldn't resist. I just said, y'all need to grow up. You need to grow up. It costs money. What do you think? We're just these people all going to.
It says that Bill Candace put something on my time. Hold on. Shh.
So anyway, what happens is we get to these ideas of immaturity where reason doesn't work. I think right now in this thing that we're seeing all day on television, we're seeing people who are unreasonable because they have not left their adolescence, their knownage. They think if they just go up and throw a big fit and threaten people's lives, that'll turn things around. All right, that's what's going on. Now, what's very interesting is that we get this idea in both of these, the ancient Enlightenment and the 18th century Enlightenment, they keep coming back to the idea of freedom. We hear this over and over in scriptures, but this is one of my favorite texts. Christ has set us free for what? For freedom. Therefore, stand firm and don't submit to the bondage of slavery again, St. Paul tells us in Galatians. In the 18th century, here comes Kant in the same essay saying the Enlightenment requires nothing but freedom. And the most innocent of all may be called freedom. Freedom to make public use of one's reason in all matters. So for Kant, the freedom to choose is what enlightenment really requires. This is exactly what we're hearing in the text. But the difference is that in the 18th century Enlightenment, reason becomes it comes to mean sense. Whereas in the ancient idea, enlightenment was a certain kind of sensibility, a way of understanding the world, a way of approaching the world and engaging the world from an angle of, I am free. I am moving into light. I live in an enlightened kind of mentality. I'm not going back into darkness. I'm refusing to let myself become bound by those kinds of things. They were both, however, pushing toward the same thing because they were both responding to religion. And in both levels, enlightenment was designed to be this huge stop sign. Is it just stop? Some things got to stop. We got to stop with the dogma. We've got to stop with the idea that what we are handing down is dogmatic truth, that it is above, that it's sacrosanct, that it can't be questioned. Mary is absolutely right. Dogma is the kind of idea that says doubt is a problem, right? Dogma is the kind of idea that says, don't you question it. How many of us grew up in faith traditions that they said, this is how it is, don't ask any questions. How dare you question? This is what it is, right? That's dogma. And I love that it's like, but they were also responding to superstitions. The idea that things happen because there are evil forces in the world and there's all of this stuff that's going on that I can't control, And I believe that there's a spirit of evil in the world. I want to be very clear of that. We see it around us. We've seen it magnified in gross ways in the last few years. But there are a lot of people that just like, why did you do that? Oh, the devil made me do that. The devil didn't make you do that. You did that, right? Why? I'm just having a bad day. Oh, child, the devil's just out to get you. The devil's not out to get you. You're just having a bad day. Join this human race of ours. Some days are bad. There are some days the car won't start, and some days, you realize that's the day you realize you forgot to pay the light bill. Okay, there's that on top of that. Then all of a sudden, some days, you burn the dinner. All that happens. The devil's not messing with you. You're having a bad day. All right. Then there is this blind belief. And a lot of us will encounter people of blind belief in a lot of ways. But in the religious realm, these are people, this is the crowd that they're the ones that are on the bumper stickers. I always want to try to, if I could, I would just drive around the world and stop people when I see certain bumper stickers. Just pull them over and have a little chat with them, But these are the folks that are God said it, I believe it, and that settles it. Now, I'm not sure what settles that. Is it that you believe it? Or is it that God said it? And what if what you're believing God said is not what God meant? How do you get that worked out? But that settles it. And this idea of blind belief, people will say that's faith. Oh, just believe it, it'll all be okay. No, faith gets you to a place of trust and confidence. It doesn't get you to a place of saying, oh my God, I believe it. That's where we get all of this name it and claim it stuff and the prosperity stuff. And all these people, when I was working as a chaplain in the hospital, and those of you that have done chaplain work have walked in on the very same situations where there have been people that are saying, I don't want the medicine, I don't want the surgery because I believe God is going to heal me. And it's like, maybe God is healing you with the surgery. Could that be a possibility that you want to consider? No, because I need a miracle. All right. And this idea, all of that. And so what you get ultimately is irresponsible religion. It's irresponsible. And both of these movements, these enlightenment movements, both in the ancient time of Jesus's and Paul's day, and in the 18th and 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, are designed to put a stop to this kind of stuff. So what happens is they're wanting us to think about things in a different kind of way. Because when we look at these things here, y'all, these are binary constructs. Do you see what I'm saying? Dogma is this is truth, and everything else is not true. Superstition, this is why this happens. There's no other explanation for it. I walked under a ladder. There's just no other way to explain it. I spilled the salt. No other way to explain it. Blind belief. If you don't believe it, then you can't receive it. There are binaries, and that's a religious thing. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. Religion is not faith. They are not synonymous. Religion is a system that may have been designed in a certain way to get us, to lead us toward faith. But quite often, the need to keep religion alive will make people make decisions and say things and do things and set up structures as a way that actually cancels faith, as a way of trying to hold on to the people that are in the movement. Are you tracking with me? So it's just like the way they try to keep a TV series going when the star dies, and then they want, that's that same kind of thing. And they're trying to hold on to their faithful people. But then after a while, the next generation comes along and says, that was mom and dad. I'm not that interested in that. And it's like, you better get interested in it, because if you don't believe, what's going to happen? Well, we all know the big one. You're going to die and go to hell. That's the way it goes. There is the way it goes. And both of these ages of enlightenment keep saying there is something going on here. Freedom is really where you should be going. If this stuff puts you in bondage, if it makes you fearful, if it makes you have to give up your rational ability to understand what faith is, if it makes you have to say no to doubt, then you're probably not practicing faith. You're probably doing religion. And you can have faith and religion, but you can also have religion without faith. You see that? Now, I want us to go to one of our, we've all been to weddings where we've heard this passage read, and we all know this passage. And let me see, I haven't picked on Wilbert in a while. Could you read this for us, please, Wilbert? I just need to hear your voice for my own comfort tonight. See, are you unmuted yet? Can we get you unmuted? Let's see. I think you have to unmute from your end. Are you stuck?
Okay,
Oh,
great.
there you go.
It's like I didn't even know I was supposed to get it, so whenever it comes, it'd be great. So thank
Hello?
you.
Hello, there you go.
Um,
Hang on, let me see. I think Walt is
No,
not
that was
muted.
it. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Let me mute Walt. There you go. Okay, go ahead, Wilbert. I'm sorry.
Hey, Tim, for some reason, the picture disappeared.
Are you all seeing, wait, are you seeing the text?
I'm not seeing anything.
I see it.
I see it.
We see
Okay.
it.
Well, Wilbert, we'll read for you then.
Sorry.
Jeff, take it.
Oh, okay. Let me blow it up a little bit. Oh, okay. What is Paul describing? This is 1 Corinthians 13, 8 through 13.
Mhm.
Love never fails. As for prophecies, they will be brought to an end. As for tongues, they will stop. As for knowledge, it will be brought to an end. We know in part and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, what is partial will be brought to an end. When I was a child, I used to speak like a child, reason like a child, think like a child. But now that I have become a man, I've put an end to childish things. Now we see a reflection in a mirror. Then we will see face to face. Now I know partially, but then I will know completely in the same way that I have been completely known. Now faith, hope, and love remain. These three things, and the greatest of these is love.
Okay, be ready to unmute when you got the answer. Why is love the greatest? It's right here on the page, but why is love the greatest?
Because it never fails.
Ding, 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 winner. There you go. Give that man a stuffed animal. He won. Love never fails. What that means is that love is complete. It's perfect. And when you see in the and he has spent all of that, we all know the beginning of this text, right? We all know it probably in the King James, because that's the poetry that gets read in so many services. Though I speak with the tongues of men and angels and have not love, it profiteth me nothing, right? Love is patient. Love is, though I give myself to be poor. Love are all of these things, right? Then it just seems like he's summing up. Love never fails. Then he goes to, as for prophecies, they will be brought to an end, and knowledge will be brought to an end. We know in part, but when the perfect comes, Paul is trusting us to make this connection here, that when he's really meaning is whenever love is fully realized, whenever we are finally completely in the fullness of God, that's when we will be in the fullness of love, right? That's the point. Okay, so then he says, let me just try to explain it like this. When I was a child, I used to speak like a child and I reasoned like a child, but now I've grown up. So I put an end to childish things, all right? The same way that I am growing more into myself, I should be growing more into perfection. I should be working more toward this idea of being more and more made perfect, where in love, because love is the greatest. Love never fails. Are you tracking so far? This is the kind of stuff that we usually think like, okay, the poetry's over. He's got to do this he's put this tail on this poem, but that's not what's going on. He's trying to explain something. And then he says something that I love. Now we see a reflection in a mirror. In the King James, it's even more poetic. Now we see through a glass darkly. We look into a mirror and the perfection is not there yet. It's dim. We can't quite see what we're becoming. We can't quite see who we can be. We can't quite see how we will be made perfect in love. But then one day we will look at it in all its fullness. All right. Now we just know a little bit. As much as we think we know, we just know a little bit. All right. But one day when we are made perfect in love, we will know completely the same way that I have been completely known. What is he talking about? God knows him. The God of love knows him completely. We've gone through this a million times in these Bible studies, right? We've talked about how the hair on your heads are numbers and while you were in the womb and all of this, that God knows us completely. And so Paul is saying eventually when I gain myself, whenever I get into this unfailing place of love, I will know the same way I've been completely known. I want to ask you a question. As you've grown in love, which comes with becoming more mature, have you noticed how much broader your understanding has become? Have you noticed that? A person who learns to love more suddenly says, you know what? There might be 5 other explanations for that. We can't really judge that. You ever notice that? But when you were 20, you understood it all, right? You knew, I know why you're doing that. Now I'm older and it's like, maybe I'm not quite so sure. There might be something more going on here. And so we begin to broaden out. And then he says, now these 3 things remain: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of them is love, because love is perfect. Love does not fail. But hope and faith are vulnerable. They take some doing and they're linked together. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about now, because we're going to get into this whole idea of art and this idea of comprehension versus apprehension. When we think about faith, faith is something that we apprehend. It's not something we can ever comprehend. If we think we can make sense out of faith in a logical, scientific way, we're going to run. I mean, that is a really long run off a very short pier, because you just about get to boom, what is God? And you're out. Done. I'm done. I got no proof. Got no nothing for this, right? But apprehension, the sense or the sensibility of something that is greater at work, whatever we want to call that, that is a way of understanding and responding to God the same way we respond to art. It becomes intuitive. It becomes a way of sort of understanding, I can't really measure this, I can't define it, but it is affecting me somehow. And it's affecting me in a way that is helping to shape the way I understand and respond to the world. The same thing, perfection versus imperfection. All right. There are all these studies, and you probably all went. Did you all take art history in college? Did you take that art history class? We used to call it slides at noon. It always was at noon, and you'd sit in the dark. I never will forget it. You'd sit in the dark when I was an undergrad at Northwestern, and I took all three quarters of it 4 days a week at noon, clicking through 500 slides. Here we go, and here we go, and here we go. You know, that was back in the days when you could smoke in class, and I was a terrible smoker. And you could, and I would come in with my pack of Marlboros, and and my Diet Coke, and I would throw back the Diet Coke for lunch and smoke half a pack of cigarettes, just sitting there in the class, just like, what is this? Because every picture they would say, now, isn't this wonderful? But notice over here, there's a flaw. Notice over here, there's a flaw. Art is always not about responding to perfection. It's about responding to the imperfection. And sometimes we build imperfections into the art in such a way that they become kind of a new kind of perfection. The blues are a great example of that. The way that the blues are formed working off, and Wilbert is the musician here. He could do even more technical beauty to this than I, but they're done the songs are set in minor keys and they're playing off of sevenths. There are no, and that's kind of like seen as, those are augmented chords. Those are not supposed to be your bass chords, but that's what the blues are built on. And so it's that kind of stuff that happens where the blue note, which would be thought to be an imperfection, becomes the perfect note in art. It's a fascinating way the way this works. So science and knowing is science and knowing can sit on one side of the aisle, and art and faith can sit on the other. And you get this sense of it in 1 Corinthians when he says, look, we're seeing a reflection, y'all. We're responding in a way that's artistic. Faith is making us, it's imperfect. We can only respond to faith in its imperfection. We can only know a little bit. We will never know completely. All right, love is what's perfect. We're moving in that direction. But right now, this is the best we got, y'all. Faith is the best we got, and it's not perfect. That should take a load off. Does that help you? A lot of folks want faith to have all the answers. And there are folks that will testify, oh, I didn't know what I was doing. And then I got saved and sanctified and filled with the Holy Ghost. And all of a sudden, every day, I just wake up praising Jesus and I have the best day ever. And then I just look up and say, you missed that part about not telling lies. You missed that part. Because I know you don't have the best day every day. I know you don't. Okay, you may think you do, but you've sort of deluded yourself into thinking that you are living in a state of perfection, and you're not. Faith is imperfect because it's designed for those of us that are imperfect, living in an imperfect world. That's why Hebrews famously says it's the reality of what we hope for, which is a really clever way of saying it's not yet real. It's the reality of what we hope for and proof of what we don't see. I'm trying to look at what the translation of what we don't see. This idea that when you hang your hat on faith, you know that what you're doing is you're doing something that's outside of what is logical and provable and evidentiary, right? How do you know God exists? You know, I don't know. There's a great old gospel song that says, I know God is real because I can feel him in my heart. Yes, God is real. I love that song. That song is one of those songs that will make me shout like old-fashioned Pentecostal style. That song will just tear me up. I feel it in my heart. There you go. But that's my testimony. Somebody else may have a different testimony about how they know God is real. That's sort of the beauty of it. Go ahead, Chris.
I'm just still a little bit stuck on the kind of science is binary and knowing kind of concept, because I think that's wrong.
Okay.
Because in the sense of there's not a lot of difference in my mind between science and faith and science and religion. Because science is actually built on a lot of place markers of what we think might be the truth.
Right.
And one of the difficulties that lots of the population have at the moment, based on that binary perception of science, is, but the science keeps changing. And of course the science keeps changing, because science is not based on a fixed truth. It's based on, I have a belief and a faith that I'm putting a place marker here. And now I'm going to seek whether or not the evidence supports that. And lots of times the evidence doesn't support that. And when you kind of look at a scientific paper, one of the part of it is a discussion of, well, what does that actually mean? So it isn't fixed.
That's good. Yes, I would agree that, except that there are laws in science, right? And there are theories. And go ahead, Lisa.
I'm sorry. I think that the way Chris described it makes it more like faith, right? Because I think when we think about science, we think there is an objective truth out there, but we're aspiring to find it, to reach it. We have a hypothesis as to what it will be.
Mm-hmm.
But the actual physical reality of the world is there, whether we know it or not. And that seems to be like the way we're talking about faith.
I think you're right. I think what I'm wanting to pull apart is the idea that science we keep looking to science as this is what will settle things. And Chris, to your point, it doesn't necessarily settle things, but we treat science like, you know what, this is okay, I gotcha. All right, this is the way thermodynamics work. All right, this is the way we talk about relativity like it's not a theory. It's a theory. That's all it is. But we all talk about, oh, you know, the time and space continuum. We talk about all this stuff as if it is, because what has happened on the side of enlightenment, the idea of reason, because we can logically explain how that theory works, we take it, we privilege it as knowledge. Am I making sense, Christy, what you're saying? A lot of times we think of science as like, okay, we can logically explain what this theory is about, so that must be true. Whereas there's a lot of faith that is just illogical. There is no idea. Like this thing that Jesus says here, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can tell the mulberry tree, get up and, you know, go into the sea, and it will obey you. Now, nobody who heard Jesus say that went around talking to mulberry trees. I promise you. Nobody said, let's go give this a try. All right. They were not treating that like it was a scientific truth, right? What they were understanding, what they were beginning to understand is that faith is going to push you to believe in things that would seem 100% illogical and not readily and easily defined and proven. That's all Jesus is saying. Essentially, he's saying what these other two verses are saying. It's just not really clear how this works. It's something that we can't prove, but it's there, and it's something that we need to honor and respect and respond to. Does that, Chris, does that help you or not? No?
I don't disagree. But I just think that the way that we talk about science is incredibly flawed.
Yes. Yes.
And even within that, there are, you know, there are theories and there are laws. There are also laws that have been discredited because science, you know, as we explore further truth, we may actually find something that discredits something that came before. So those laws are not necessarily fixed.
And there are the classic examples, like when we discovered that we will go around the sun instead of the sun goes around us, right? That all of a sudden something gets turned around. What I'm wanting us to see with this is this idea that we keep trying to make everything, in fact, we keep wanting to make faith diametrically opposed to science. And that's sort of the way that we start thinking about it, when we really should be leaning into faith. I'm really pushing us toward a different place, which is we should be leaning in toward faith, thinking of it less in the context of science and more in the context of art, of things that are highly subjective, of things that cannot be easily quantified, of things that for the sake of the word, we should think of apprehensively, right? As a way of like, that's part of it. But I also, if you've been with me in any discussions of faith, you know, here it comes, you knew you were going to get this. Part of the problem is that we have also distorted the meaning of the word faith in modern Christianity. And that's the problem. In the Gospels, this is when I miss Shay right now, because he would have a wonderful breakdown of this even for us. In the Gospels, when we see the word faith, it's the word pistis, which is not meaning wholesale belief against all odds. All right? We're taught that faith means, oh, just believe, it doesn't matter. How many of us have heard those stories? I just believed, you know, they told me, I just kept believing, you know. What pistis means, and the way that the early church used it was in terms of a confidence or a trust or a faithfulness And they come from the word which means to be persuaded, peto, to persuade, to feel confident about something. And that's a very interesting notion. That's not about belief so much as it is just relaxing and saying, you know what? I know that there's something bigger going on here. I know there must be something happening that's going to work for my good. I know that I don't have an answer, so I'm just going to have to trust that whoever holds the answer is taking care of what I can't manage on my own. Shannon, yeah?
I look like the student, right?
No, go ahead.
That knows to raise my hand.
That was good.
I was wondering how that ties in, what you were just saying. I wonder how that ties in back to the guiding light thing from earlier that we were talking about, how we started it out with light.
Yeah.
And where faith doesn't really have a light to follow in the end. It's sort of more of a journey through the dark, right?
Except there is this idea. The ancients kept talking about coming out of darkness into light. The journey into darkness is always, well, we're going into Lent, right? We could use that same kind of thing, or Advent. We rehearse these journeys of moving through darkness toward light, but there's always this movement toward light. And faith is always in the darkness saying, you know what, I know that light is going to come here. I know that I'm in a state of confusion. I'm in a state of despair. I'm in a state of doubt, and I know we're going to get to that, Mary, but it's this, there is this whole notion that in the middle of all of these things, these negativities, somewhere, my response to that has to be a trust. My response to the darkness has to be the light is there. I have to trust that it's there. That is also sort of the St. John of the Cross's dark night of the soul, where you are actually moving in such a state of fear that God is so awesome that God is almost dark because you can't comprehend God. And yet you move through the dark night of the soul, trusting that enlightenment is coming. It's coming. There is light for me, all right? There is a light that will be there. I mean, we sang that actually out of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, didn't we? But it's this idea, there is a light. And so what it is it's not that we are walking around in a state of light. We are moving in toward we're being brought into the light, being drawn in. Love, light, right? This idea of perfection being love, we could almost translate that as full light too, full illumination, because what does Paul say? We're looking through a glass darkly right now. We're not seeing fully. We're in the dim. I lived my whole life in the dim. I mean, about everything. I'm just in the dim. And that's okay because I'm moving toward light. And I love this quote in Hebrews because this was quoted to me my whole life, this was quoted to me like a club. It was one of those scriptures that, whenever you got out of line, they would mouth it off at you and just beat you upside the head with it. It's impossible to please God without faith. I could do it in the King James Version in my sleep. For without faith, it's impossible to please him, but it's impossible to please God without faith, because the one who draws near to God must believe that God exists and that God rewards people who try to find God. So Shannon, there you go. It is this idea we're drawing near, we're trying to find. What I love is that what we're seeing about faith here in this text, everybody gets focused on that. You got to believe God exists. But really what we hear twice, it's underscored here, is that faith is really about just trying to get to an understanding, a nearness, of discovery of God, a way of, so it's, Chris, in some ways that is a scientific endeavor, right? A way of discovery, but it's also from an artistic standpoint, trying to apprehend what we can't quantify, to apprehend what we can't reasonably explain. And that's sort of the way that this sort of begins to work on us. So freedom to believe, here you go, Mary. I always think Mary comes and looks over my shoulder and gets my slides. Freedom to believe is the freedom to doubt. The great Paul Tillich says that doubt is in the very content of faith. If you don't have doubt, then what are you believing? Then you're just knowing. The freedom to doubt is what Paul is expressing when he says we see a reflection in a mirror. We don't have it all. It's just sort of there, and we're trying to work it all out. We are still in the investigatory stage of things, if we're going to use scientific terms, right? We are not even in the lab yet. We're just trying to figure out what this might be. Now, so my question is that I've been praying about and struggling with is, if we think about faith as an art form, not as something that we can define and measure and quantify, but something that we respond to the same way we respond to art, something that might move us and mystify us, and supposed to solve our problems, create problems, as good art does. Really good art should, even good comedy should disturb you, because the laughter comes from you being disturbed, and then the sigh comes from you figuring out that it was only a joke. That's the way good comedy. I mean, Freud wrote a whole essay about that. So there's this idea of freedom. How would an aesthetic approach be? What would that look like if we practice faith going into it, expecting to be doubtful, expecting to be troubled, expecting to not have the answers? That's the question. And what got me going on this was this kind lady. This is Pauline Kael. If you're old enough, you might have known her from The New Yorker as the film critic for The New Yorker. She started in 1967 when she saved Bonnie and Clyde from the clutches of the studio fire pile, and wrote a 20-page review that said they have changed the American movie art form forever with this movie. And she turned out to be right. And she wrote into the early 90s when Parkinson's made it impossible for her to write anymore. Pauline Kael was my mentor. I've spent days and days and months at a time writing and talking, and at her house, at her table, all of that kind of stuff, because I started life as a film critic. And she's the reason why I started life as a film critic, because when my parents got The New Yorker, which is something I never really understood, because they were fundamentalist Christians. I don't know why they were reading The New Yorker, except I think my father had a real fondness for the cartoons. And that's why everybody says they read The New Yorker, but I think he liked the cartoons. And so they got The New Yorker, and I started reading her column, The Current Cinema. And I did what I always did as a kid. I wrote her a letter, because I didn't understand one thing she was talking about. Couldn't understand it at all. I was all of like 11 or 12 years old, and I just wrote and said, I really like the way you write, and I like the words you use. I looked them all up, but I don't understand what you're saying. How can I understand you better? And she did what became a habit in our correspondence. She took my letter and she flipped it over on the back, and she wrote, in this crazy penmanship she had, she wrote big letters, here are the books you need to read. And she sent me a list of books. So then I wrote her back, I got the books. What should I be reading in them? And it started this correspondence when I was 12. And by the time I got into college, I was at Willard Residential College on the Northwestern campus. And our job was to determine who our faculty for the year would be. These would be guest speakers that we would invite in to spend a weekend with us and everything. And I immediately said, we have to have Pauline Kael. And that's how I got to finally meet her. Was I made Northwestern fly her in. And that's how I spent my first weekend with Pauline Kael. And then she's like, why aren't you coming to New York? And I wound up, I won't even go through the details. It involved my parents' attorneys would have to fly packages to New York every Friday. And I convinced my mom and dad's lawyer to let me be the courier instead of them hiring a courier. Just buy me an airline ticket and I would take the packages on Friday and deliver it and come back home on Monday. And that's how I would get to New York. And I would go spend weekends with Pauline. And that's how I got to know her. Pauline was everybody's favorite film critic, unless you were a film critic, and then you probably hated her, because she broke all of the rules. And she did it because she responded to art in the same way that we're talking about responding to faith. Everybody, this is in the 60s and 70s when film schools were just breaking out and everybody had a theory. If you've been in school at all, you probably know about the auteur theory, the French idea about that every director is the one, the artist that's in control, and everybody else just kind of lines up behind the director. But there were also these, Manny Farber had a theory about negative space, and you really should read a movie by what's not in the movie instead of what is in the movie. There was all of this theory that was going on, and she didn't have a theory. She just went to the movies and came home and wrote like a house of fire about the way that the movie affected her. And that unnerved everybody, because she quite often wound up being able to name what was going on and see what was going on, while everybody else was trying to put everything in their categories and make everything organized and do all this academic work. And so while they were all trying to figure out why Hitchcock was important and who the next Hitchcock was, she says this guy, Martin Scorsese, is tearing it up. He's our next great filmmaker. Francis Ford Coppola is amazing. Watch out for this character named Steven Spielberg. And she named them all. Brian De Palma, Robert Altman, she named them all while everybody else wasn't even going to their movies. And that was because she had this faith in this medium. She responded not in a logical way, but in a sensual way to the movies. And she was very, very, very clear about this with everybody. And that made everybody upset. That also made her upset because she carried a lot of power. And I think she might have been 5 feet tall, but I pretty much put her at 4'10". She was this tiny little thing who wielded this great big pen that made and broke careers. And so she's been gone, my goodness, she died many, many years ago. But the great thing about Pauline is that she left us some legacies of interviews. Here she is at the Writers' Workshop in Iowa talking to a group of writers. But I wanted to play this little clip for you because I was just looking at some old footage of her, and this is what prompted this whole idea for me, that maybe we should quit thinking about faith as being contradictory to science and logic, and think about it in a whole new way as just being art and thinking about it artistically. And here's what she said.
One does not need to rationalize one's instincts. One's instincts are the sum total of one's mind and responses. If you can't respond fully and completely as a human being, there's something the matter with you if you're so split that you have to rationalize your instincts. I mean, presumably, if you're together at all of you is reacting together. I'm not some mechanist making a division between mind and instinct. Well, academics tend to be afraid of new work, and they derive their standards from old work and then impose it on new work. And so they reject practically everything new, and that's why they often have such a bad record for opposing great artists, because they're afraid of something that doesn't fit their standards.
The idea that we have been conditioned to believe is that our instincts always swim against our logic, right? Our emotions and what our hearts are feeling need to be analyzed to align with the logical, what we know and how we've organized our thoughts. And the thing about Cale that Cale taught me, and I got to tell you, I've been to seminary and I grew up in the church, but even though she was raised by Orthodox Jews, she was an atheist. She swore like a truck driver. Oh my goodness, you couldn't take her anywhere and trust her if she wasn't on television. That was Cale. But in the middle of it all, I think she taught me more about faith, and the way I respond to faith came more from her, and understanding that my instinct is not anything to be afraid of. Instinct is not anything to try to reason away. Instinct is not something that you should have to account for. It is part of the wholeness of you. And just as we are always claiming, and the scripture keeps promising wholeness, and we keep saying, well, okay, wholeness, except for the part that I can't, that part.
So in your analogy, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, no, go ahead, yes.
So in your analogy, the auteur theory and negative space theory, that's all religion, right? That's all
That's
human
religion.
construction. Okay.
Because we're going to hear from Saul Bass in a minute, and he's going to explain how that kind of works whenever we don't develop our art, and we rely on technique, or we rely on theory or something like that. He doesn't spell it out quite so specifically, but when we get to, and I've got friends of mine, oh my God, I've never really gotten in a lot of fights over religion, but I've been in fights where I'm ready to punch somebody over film. And it's usually been about something like, okay, I don't care if that movie sucks. It's a Hitchcock. It's got to be great. It's like, it's a terrible movie. It's a terrible picture. It was an awful, I tell people over and over, The Birds is a terrible movie. Everything about it is wrong and bad, but it's Hitchcock. It's like, but it's bad Hitchcock. You had a bad day. But no, the auteurs, they're going to say, no, it's brilliant. And that's because they are enamored with the theory and they have left their instincts alone. Okay, because that Birds movie, it's not that it's a fantasy, the logic in the movie doesn't make sense. And it puts you through all of these changes. And then it does those awful things to the children that's completely unnecessary. It's unnecessary. And this is just Hitchcock cheating. And so but you can't tell that to an auteurist. Can't do that because the theory says Hitchcock is the greatest filmmaker that ever lived. And so that's the way that works, right? So when I think about Pauline,
and one does not need to
stop that.
rationalize one's
Stop.
instinct.
Although I know that voice. How do we think that rationalizing instincts conflicts with the freedom we need to believe is the question that I keep struggling with coming out of that conversation that I bumped into. How often do we find ourselves instinctively being drawn into a state of trust or confidence, or I know that something better, I know this is going to work out in my good, and then we begin to rationalize? Have you experienced that? Deep sigh from Lisa.
I was just recalling a time when I posted something like on Facebook and a friend of mine thought it was sexist or something. And the way that I respond to sexism, I always feel it in my gut the second I see it or feel it, and I didn't feel and I tried to explain that. I mean, that was my only explanation, was I didn't feel it when it didn't happen. I didn't get that thing in my gut when I feel something sexist. So I didn't think of it as sexist because I didn't feel it, and that didn't satisfy her. But yeah, that was my story. And I stuck with it.
That's a great example. It's a great example. The cancel culture problem, right, is that we're wanting to rationalize everything instead of take a deep breath and see instinctively, intuitively, what are we understanding about this? How is this going? And after a while, it's another kind of lynching, isn't it? And that's something we need to be careful about. And so those are cultural things. I think that we do the same thing in matters of faith, where it's like, okay, I can go this far, but now instinctively, I know. I'll take a great example. I love the Christmas story. I love the Christmas story. I love it. Rationally, it doesn't make one bit of sense. Okay, there's just nothing about it that makes any sense. And that story's, the trouble with that story is tripled, T-R-E-B, tripled by the fact that there's not a lot of history that bears any of this out. We have no historical record of this tax that was supposed to happen. We have no historical record that there was anybody needing to go to their hometown to be taxed. Romans didn't send people all over the place to get for a census. There's no record of that. There's no record that Herod ever killed the children. We don't know where these magi come from. There is no historical way to explain what this stuff, none of that. But the story is still somehow, instinctively, I know this story is true. And that's where the art, the artistic, the aesthetic response, and we all respond to Christmas aesthetically. We may not know it, but at a certain point we have to say, look, I understand. We won't even get into the virgin birth. I just understand that the plot is tough, right? But instinctively, there's some truth there, and we can believe and trust and rely and have confidence in that truth, even if we're not sure that maybe, historically, that's it. I go back again. I keep going back with my mouse. I got to get a new mouse. Now,
I think our instinct is necessarily truth, right?
No.
I know you can't be empirical about it, but I mean, maybe the thing I posted was sexist. Right. And maybe someone that believes in the innate superiority of the white race, instinctivly in their gut, they're wrong. Right. So instinct isn't necessarily
empirically be true. That's the whole point. But we're looking in a mirror darkly. We're looking at art. You see, that's what I want us to get. We can all do maybe we will do a field trip to the Art Institute and look at Grant Wood's American Gothic, and what do you see? I just see two really sad people stuck on a farm. You know, that's what I see. Other people see American spirit and beauty, and other people get all wrapped up in the way that, you know, the farmhouse looks like a Gothic cathedral, all this kind of stuff. Is any of those true or less true? They're all true because they are apprehended. They're apprehended, and that's sort of the way that faith needs, which means the reason why Gather, I think, is so beautiful, and I was talking actually with Stuart Jameson about this the other day. The reason why Gather is one that is so beautiful is that we are all understanding this is all apprehensive. This is what we apprehend, and each of us may see it differently, but we are all welcome to see it differently in the company of one another. And that's kind of what makes a faith community. Now, this character, Saul Bass, was my boss when I lived in LA. I worked with Saul for a long time. And Saul, where I worked, was over in the corporate division. Saul's was very famous for designing brands. And this isn't the half of it, brands. And he had a wonderful business that made him a millionaire many, many times over because he never sold the brand to the companies that wanted them. He held the right to the brand and the right to how the brand was used so that they would lease the brand from him. And part of their lease would be that he had to approve all of the usages, which meant that we had an entire studio. He had this studio on Sunset Boulevard off La Brea, if you know LA, right next to the Burger King. And it was, I don't know what that is now. I think it's an In-N-Out, or maybe it was an In-N-Out and it was a Burger, but anyway, right there. And then there was a big, huge back house that was a studio that was full of young designers who did nothing all day but take out their rulers and measure the way all the brands were being used on all the packaging. That's what they did. And he charged these companies a fortune for doing this. This was Saul's gig. But he was famous already for designing movie titles and posters. If all of the Hitchcock films from the 50s are Saul Bass title sequences, you know, those paper cutout things that you see in the Hitchcock movies, all of this West Side Story, all of these, all the way up through Marty Scorsese's Casino, I think was Saul's last picture. Saul was an artist, but he also he was fascinated with the creative process, and he won the Oscar for best short film in 67, 68, somewhere in there, for a film called Why Man Creates. I couldn't download it to show you all, but you should look for it. It's really wonderful. And one of the big things is it's always like man is always trying to search. The creative impulse is the proverbial search impulse, the inquiry impulse. That is the creative impulse. And as a result of that, I would say that the faith impulse is a creative impulse because faith is a search. It's always a way to try to apprehend what cannot be comprehended. It's a search. And Saul became the godfather, literally, of designers. Literally, every graphic designer, if you know a graphic designer and you just say, do you know anything about Saul Bass? They'll gasp. They will just, I promise you, Saul Bass. It's just sort of the way that, like that's the way that goes. And in the 80s, while I was still there at Bass Yeager, the company that he and Herb Yeager had founded to do all this branding, while I was at Bass Yeager, they came in and did these long interviews with Saul. And he said something, and this is something that I really love, about designers and what are the basics for it. And listen to him. It's really seems like common sense. But what he's talking about is something that I think a lot of us do with faith. All right. I hope I'm making sense tonight. I'm just all jazzed about this. Am I making sense? Am I good? Doing okay? All right. Thank you. Watch this. Okay, now wait, let's go. Where's he at? Let's go. Come on, Saul.
So what is your advice to students, Saul?
Learn to draw. If you don't, you're going to live your life getting around that and trying to compensate for that. It's like now, so when the problem is there, instead of doing a drawing when you have to do it, you know, to deal with the communication issue, you find another lesser way to do it. And it's like you have to do this. Instead of forthrightly dealing with it, you have to sort of turn your arm and twist your shoulder and do a solution that comes out as a square or a triangle or a circle, you know, and that's ridiculous. You can't get away with that. It's a crippling absence that, and the unfortunate thing is,
a crippling absence. I would propose to you all that there are a lot of people who are practicing faith that never learn to draw, for lack of a better phrase. You understand? They never learn to just give themselves over to their instincts, to their intuitions, to trust themselves, to trust God. And instead, they've got a whole lot of sort of technique and stuff that's the equivalent of trying to draw, you know, like what he's talking about. I have seen people drive all the way around the block to explain their faith when it's like, really, it's just trust. You know, that's all it is. It's just trust. It is I don't have an answer, but I'm going to trust there must be somebody with an answer and something must be working out for my good. And I'm going to trust that in the end, we'll understand it. There's that great, those of you that grew up in the tradition I grew up in, you all know that great song, we'll understand it better by and by. The greatest song, one of the greatest trust songs there is. By and by, when the morning comes, we'll understand it better. That's the kind of trust that's different than me trying to make everything all complicated. That's Saul's equivalent of designers who don't know how to draw. They know how to design, they don't know how to draw. And so the idea is a lot of us want to make things, not a lot of us, but a lot of folks want to make things very complicated when really.
So what is your advice to students?
It's just, okay, come on,
to
really?
draw.
Oh, come on. So the question is really, how does learn to draw, I've pretty much told you, you know, equate with just exercising our freedom to believe?
That makes me, Reverend Tim,
yeah.
makes me think about, well, I've been playing classical guitar for a total of 20 years. Well, in 2019, I began playing violin. And so recent, you know, so I have a book and I have a teacher now. It's on Zoom, my lessons, of course. And so the other day I decided, okay, I played my scales. I played what's in the book. Now I'm just gonna play me. And I did something that just totally amazed myself with that bow. And there's nothing I could have just explained to myself, so to speak, to do. I just had to do it. And it was very like, it would be, I guess people would say advanced, so to speak, the way I was moving the bow just because I wanted to do me, play me.
And that's that's the point. Yeah, go ahead.
I still want to do my scales and all those formal things. But at the same time, I want to do something that could be beyond my level in terms of those things that I'm learning now. Just something that comes from me, you know, and I did it. It's amazing to me.
And that's the beauty of it. And music is a great parallel of that because yes, you got to do the scales. You got to, I mean, when I was doing piano, I had to do these Hannon's exercises. I don't know, those of you, if you play piano, Hannon, no, and it's like, it would make you crazy. But then if you didn't have that nimbleness in your fingers when it came time to create, or when you came time to express yourself, or to trust that you had a music in you, you had to have the skill, you know. All of our Bible study, all of these things that we do are developing and honing the skills and the knowledge so that when we move into an instinctive state of faith, it's like, yeah, of course, that's how this works. I get it now. I see the way this works. Because the theory and the rehearsal, you know, the saying of the Lord's Prayer every day, and I think most of us do, or a lot of us do, the Lord's Prayer every day, is not just there. The question was not, Lord, how should we pray? It was, Lord, teach us to pray, right? And that's the way that works. So now here's the prayer. That means that I know how prayer works. I don't have to say it word for word. There are some days when instinctively my prayer is not the Lord's Prayer. It might sound similar, but it's me living into the fullness of who I am, just like you were doing with your bow, with you know, just like Saul is saying to do, learn to draw. You can't design your way out of this. You have to learn how to draw. You have to learn instinctively how to just do this trust piece. And then we're going to get to one of my favorites, and I have no personal connection with her. I wish I did. This is Joni Mitchell, who is one of my favorite devotion partners. I'll just say that. I put on Joni when I pray. And I know that she's singing about breaking up with people and hanging out in bars and everything, but there's something prayerful to me about Joni. And she speaks to me in very interesting and very real kinds of ways. And quite often there's a line in her song that just triggers a whole sort of revelation to me. And I was watching some of her stuff not long ago too, and she said something that was very interesting about her own art. As the artist, how she understood her art to work. And I'm going to get us there, and then we're going to have a little more discussion and call it a night. But I love her here too, because she looks like she could just be your aunt, doesn't it? I love Joni. Here's Joni Mitchell as like your favorite aunt. I love this right here.
And the trick is, if you listen to that music and you see me, you're not getting anything out of it. If you listen to that music and you see yourself, it'll probably make you cry and you'll learn something about yourself, and now you're getting something out of it, you know?
If you listen to the music and you see me, the question had been earlier, you're known as this confessional songwriter, you know, and there was that whole group, that Laurel Canyon group, right? That was like Carole King and Joni Mitchell and Laura Nyro and James Taylor, and everybody assumed they were all writing about each other. And then Carly Simon comes in, and the big question is, who is You're So Vain about, right? There's all that stuff. Everybody wants to know what these songs are about. And she just shut the interviewer down and said, that's not the way this works. If you're looking at my music to find out about me, then I'm failed as an artist. But you should be looking at my music, and if you're finding out about you, that's the way that works. We look in a mirror darkly. I love that. Paul is saying in our quest for faith, we're invariably, if we're doing it right, we're going to get really good looks at ourselves. We're going to see ourselves. And we're going to have to trust that what's on the other side of that mirror is going to pull us along. The light, Shannon, on the other side of that dim mirror is going to pull us through. But right now, we should be, if we're doing faith right, it should be showing us to ourselves, the same way art shows us to ourselves. I imagine that I've got people on here that love The Notebook. I've never made it through The Notebook. I just really hate it. I just hate everything about it. And I love the actors, and I just hate everything about it. I just feel just really used by that movie, right? That doesn't say anything about the movie. It says something about me. You understand? That movie still shows me to myself, right? Then there are other movies that I love. My favorite movie happens to be Bonnie and Clyde. That says something about me too. I'm not crazy about the violence, but I'm not crazy about all of the radical things about the movie. What it always fascinates me and what pins me to that movie is the picnic scene where she goes to see her mother while they're on the run. And she says, I'm gonna come see you one day, Mom. And she says, no, you better not, because I'm telling you right now, Miss Bonnie Parker, you come anywhere near me, they're going to arrest you. You best just keep going. There's a moment, that moment anchors the whole movie for me. And I can see that movie, for 50 times in a year, and it wouldn't be enough. That says more about me than the movie. You see? What I want us to understand when we're looking at scripture and thinking about faith, and when we're praying and we're doing all of these things that bind us together in this community from whatever our belief stand is, understand that a real role that faith has in our lives is helping us understand ourselves. That's
Reverend Tim?
Yes.
And when I started violin in 2019, 4 months later, I decided to put my book away. This happened. And I sat on my ottoman in my book nook, and I just played me. And I wrote a piece, and then I took it to my teacher, and she played exactly what I had written, the notes on the staff. And I was like, wow, that sounds great. I wrote that.
That's a way to see yourself. Now let me go there. If we do faith right, it will surprise us too sometimes, right? All right, come on.
I have a thought.
Yes.
So this makes me think about living in the present moment or presence. And it's part of this, they brought it up as part of this study I'm doing, and they talked about mindfulness, which, and this guy couldn't understand it.
Yeah.
You know, thinking a lot of stuff in his head, but no, it's when you don't have a lot of stuff in your, and he said, he's a photographer. He says when he does his photography, he doesn't think of anything. He just goes by instincts and he gets these beautiful pictures.
Right.
And I said, you got to do your whole life like you do photography.
That's exactly right. Thank Mary, you just wrapped up the class for us. That's exactly right. It is this learning to live by instinct. And my original point, and maybe I was out of balance with the beginning, and I told you this was a little bit of an experimental class anyway, but is that we have privileged science and facts and quote unquote empirical truth so much in our lives that we've lost touch. We've privileged comprehension and understanding so much and knowledge that we have left alone a better set of knowledge, or a different set of knowledge, if not a better one, that we have ignored completely. And that is the realm of faith and creativity and looking into dim mirrors and looking and seeing what's looking back at us and knowing that the look is going to get better. Love never fails, but faith and hope, they still have some work to do, right? That's why love is the greatest. And, you know, we just sort of scoot over that. So, oh, it's the love, you know, and doesn't she look beautiful in her dress? And aren't these groomsmen all fine? The love. And what we're missing is, Paul is telling us, faith and hope work, but they're not going to be everything. Because they are totally instinctive. And that's the real challenge that we have to overcome. Whenever we're trying to figure out how we do faith, we just roll into it and we respond to it and we let ourselves see it and we let ourselves see ourselves because of it. And when we begin to use faith in that way, we get out of whether faith works. That's not the point of faith, whether or not it works. The point of faith is, does it just move us? Does it affect us? Does it show us something? Does it draw us in places that logically we may not want to go? Does it push us in ways that logically we may want to resist? Does it make us think rely less on reason and more on trust in something beyond ourselves? And when we get to that kind of place, who knows what form our faith takes? That's less of the issue than the fact that we are moving and living in a space that is intuitive. And that's really hard for us. It's really hard for us in this modern world where everything is technically worked out and there's logic behind everything. There's logic behind the way we're using Zoom. There's a whole logic program behind this, you understand? Everything is logical. But the problem is that faith and art refuse to be logical. They are stubbornly illogical because they are sensual and intuitive, and faith is sensual. These are things that it affects us and moves us in ways that are not radically logical. There I go again. Maybe I'm just stuck with Joni. So,
can I say something about instinct?
Yes.
I personally rely a lot on instinct,
and
not because I feel like that's my barometer for. Because if I react to something in a visceral way, or if I react to something, I think I'm a pretty intuitive person and I think I read situations well. And often I feel like whatever it is that I'm grappling with or that I'm involved in, I get this instinct, this feeling. And it's not necessarily based, it's not logical and it's not mathematical, and it's not, well, I can map it out in this diagram or this pie chart. It's this thing I feel. And so I feel has guided me in my life when something either just feels icky to me or it feels great. And I don't mean from like an immediate gratification way. I mean, it just feels good, like this is something good, whatever that means, whether it's pleasurable or fulfilling or whatever, or it's helped me avoid something that feels not right to me. So I think instinct is incredibly important. And I think that, each of us has that instinct, and how we use it or express it or how we sort of channel it, I think is what makes us all really unique. And you know, you can plug anything you want into a formula or whatever and get some quote unquote logical answer. But often I think the non-explainable things are really sort of the core of any of our life.
I would agree. I think that the challenge is that we have been so desensitized and I will say desensualized even, right? As a culture, where we are no longer trusting our senses. We have to have everything proven. And that's how all of a sudden, and then all of a sudden, when the proof doesn't add up with what we think we know, then we get angry and all sorts of other crazy stuff starts happening, right? I think what we have seen happen and what this whole impeachment thing is, a bunch of people who tried to logically explain an alternative theory about what was going on in the world, and then they lost control of their feelings, and they had not accounted for the feelings that were drawing them in that direction.
Were they not following their instincts?
They were, yes, they were. But the problem was that their instincts, they were not evaluating what their instincts, the harm their instincts were doing. I wanted to say
their instincts weren't based on love.
That's right. They're not moving toward perfection, right? They're moving toward hatred and power.
They weren't based on truth either.
So is the test, are your instincts based on love?
I would put it right there. If it's leading toward wholeness and love and perfection, yes. That's
because your instincts might just be prejudiced and based on hate and what you were taught to hate other people.
You could also make the argument that those aren't instincts, that those are learned behaviors too, right?
And that's what is instinct?
You know, but instinct comes from a deeper place. That's what I'm saying. Your instinct, like Dana, look, we all have them, right? We just have these moments where it's like, yeah, this is not a good person for me to be around. It may be lovely.
Yeah. Well, just thinking back to that.
know. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah.
No, on you go, Lisa.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say that I have instincts, and I don't trust them. I mean, I'm like George Costanza, do the opposite of, I don't know if you remember. That's the way it's like, do the opposite of what I'm inclined to do, and I'll be in good stead. So yeah, we have instincts, but some of us.
I mean, we're not. I want to be clear. Our instincts will lead us in good or bad places. I mean, we still have to be reasonable in understanding what our instincts are leading us to do, right? I had a week where I didn't go to bed on Tuesday night for work. I had to pull an all-nighter. I haven't had to pull an all-nighter I don't know how long. So by Wednesday night, I was toast. And then this morning, I met with my producer who was pulling his hair out because his computer died. I mean, just couldn't help, and he's got the budget and everything. And he said, I just keep laughing. I just have to keep laughing or else I'm going to cry. And I said, and I was talking about my baser instincts where it's like, thank God it's you and not me, because if it had been me, my first instinct when things go that wrong is just to throw something. And I don't know what I would have broken in the house. Just pick up something and throw it. That's my base. So you have to check, you have to know good or bad, Chris.
Going back to that, that faith aesthetic and how did you learn to draw and things, most of us are of an age. Remember that kind of time when, and the world's kind of moved on a mass space from that. But when you bought an album and you went home and you listened to that album and you had nothing else on and you listened to that album, and when it finished, you played it again. And when it finished, you played it again, and you just didn't play the hit track from it.
No, you played the whole thing.
You played the whole thing. And, I kind of started thinking about that in terms of what sparked that was that kind of thinking of a time and place. And I was thinking around a song by Martha and the Muffins called Echo Beach. It was their kind of one big hit.
Mm-hmm.
And the question that they always got asked was, well, where is Echo Beach? And the writer of the song went, well, actually, it doesn't exist. Where's your Echo Beach? But actually, the words Echo Beach are lifted from an Ultravox album. And it's like one of the tracks on an Ultravox album that no one would ever even remember being there. But you would listen to that album and you would know instinctively all of the tracks, and
Yeah.
for me that's kind of where that faith aesthetic kind of lives, and we don't have that connection with ourselves these days.
Right.
Hey Chris, can I sorry Tim, but
Go
can I
ahead,
add
Tony.
something onto that? All right, so there's this YouTuber I watch who lives in Japan for a while. I actually sent you one of his videos, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, this was before he started YouTube. When he was in Japan, he was a teacher who taught English. But here's the thing, he actually lived next to, very close to a Yakuza house.
Mm.
Yeah, but he was told by someone, yeah, you don't want to mess with those guys. They can be a bit tough. But the more the guy he actually lived there, the longer he lived there, the lesser he thought about it. And he sort of walked by, and he didn't see them picking on anyone. He didn't see them like sort of mugging people. All he did was see them, washing their cars, And then there was one case where he had to go out late at night to meet with someone, and then he encountered this guy who said he thinks it's was like a pink salon or something. Yeah, but here's the thing: the man he saw did two things he did not expect. One was the gentleman kind of gestured him in, and when he refused, he wasn't followed.
Mm.
And here's the thing: so he sort of started to realize that the Yakuza weren't just like mug you, kind of beat you up, kill you kind of thing, like we often associate them to be. Like, heck, because I mean, Japan's like the size of California, and it's very hard to acquire decent territory, and it's harder to keep it and so the only times that the Yakuza get really violent is with other Yakuza.
Ah.
And heck, and then the Tokuhoku earthquake, the Yakuza were among the first responders. Some of the first responders were from the Yakuza.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and the thing is, he even said that breaking harmony is such a taboo thing to do in Japan that even the Yakuza don't do it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so there's this idea of, quite often, to Jeff's point and to your point, Tony, is that our intuitions are not always reliable. When I told Dr. Terrell that while we were working on with this, she said, make sure you remind them, and this is doing what my teacher said, remind them that not all art is good. Some art is terrible and some art is evil, and so there is still a discrimination that's involved. There's a scripture that says, try the spirits and see if they're of God. I mean, there are all these things, there's all of this thing to know yourself, to know, what you're saying. That's why Jesus said it's out of your heart that you speak. There are all of these warnings that were given about our instincts. But even with those warnings in place, where we get in trouble is we think that we're playing it safe by shutting our instincts down. And that is what becomes prohibitive from us experiencing the fullness of faith and its possibilities. Does that make sense to everybody? What I want, some of us have to learn how to draw. It doesn't matter if it's good. We just got to learn how to draw, because we're not going to be able, there's no methodology for this. You're just going to have to draw. It's got to come out of you, and we have to understand that in the middle of this faith, that we are also getting a reflection of ourselves back. What do we love about this? What does that tell us about ourselves with what we love about this? And we need to note those things and respond to them and trust our instincts, always evaluate them. There were times when Pauline's instincts were terrible. I'm going to tell you something. She got herself in a world of hurt sometimes because she did some foolish things. She's the one that ran out of the screening of Last Tango in Paris and said that Marlon Brando and Bertolucci had altered the face of an art form. And everybody said, girlfriend, you need to slow down a little bit. I don't know if that's what they've done, but that was her instinct. And so sometimes her instincts got her into trouble. But the difference was that she was also alive to what this art form was doing in ways that critics who were working totally from a rational, theoretical approach were not alive to it. There are plenty of theologians who are brilliant academics and scholars, but they're not alive to the faith. All right. There are plenty of people that are alive to the faith that wouldn't know a theological concept if it came up and hit them upside the head, but they're alive to their faith. And so the goal always is not to swing too far in one direction or another. There are some, to Jeff's point, whose instincts are so terrible that they're reaching into bottles and pulling out snakes and waving them around the room. That's bad instincts with faith. That's terrible stuff. The snake handling and the, you know, people that are trying to raise people from the dead. That's terrible stuff. Those are terrible instincts. You need to evaluate your instincts. But at the same time, in the willing to stay away from that way crazy stuff, we shut down. You know, it's like there's really terrible art. There's terrible art. But that doesn't mean we shut down our instinctive response to good art, right? And so that's kind of what I'm playing with this idea. Thank you all for being, you know, I'm going to close with this last little bit from one of my favorite people on the whole planet, Bell Hooks. Bell always has something to say to us. And this was on the Park Avenue Methodist Church in New York. Okay, on the Upper East Side. The function of art is to do more than tell it like it is. It's to imagine what is possible. And I just like to do this. The function of faith is to do more than tell it like it is. It's to imagine what is possible. Let your instincts go with some of this. Sometimes all you got is your faith. Sometimes that's all you've got. You know, Shannon, bless your heart, you're in school, taking a full load, keeping a family going, hanging with Gather, doing 15,000 other things, bopping in and out of Pilgrim, keeping all these things going. There are going to be days when all you're going to have to run on is faith, and you're just going to have to trust. You're just going to have to trust. And that sometimes you're going to pick up the bow and then nothing going to be there. You have nothing. You're going to have to just trust. Your instinct is just going to have to kick in and say, I'm just going to trust. Data, there are days whenever you're going to get your students. I could go down every last one of you and say, there will be days where you just have to trust. Jeff, you think that you've closed the house and then all of a sudden they've picked up their U-Haul and they've decided to move to Minton. You just have to trust. And when we lose touch with those instincts, what happens is we lose a way of seeing ourselves and understanding ourselves better and getting closer to what is perfect. Any final thoughts? No? Yes? You're all yawning and stuff, I know.
Read some Bell Hooks, some more Bell Hooks.
Yeah,
there's never enough Bell Hooks.
Read Bell Hooks. Thank you very much.
No,
I haven't read anything by her, but I'm going to now.
Oh, get you some. She's amazing.
I'm sure we have a million thoughts, but this is such a great conversation about why we do what we do, right? But
it is this need that we have as a need we have as a culture, as people of a certain kind of privilege to want to nail it all down. And the minute you want to get it all nailed down is the minute that you no longer see yourself, all you're seeing is it. All right.
And it's subjective.
Totally.
Art is subjective.
Totally.
Of course, you're not going to have anything concrete.
No, nobody understands what Mona Lisa's doing. Nobody understands what she's doing. We don't know. You know, is she smiling? I don't know. Maybe she's not. There was a whole piece I read once that looks like she's got gas. All right, you know what? If that's what you see, but that's telling me more about the writer than it's telling me about the Mona Lisa, right?
Yes.
So that's the beauty of this thing and the beauty of faith. When we read scripture, I want you all to not be reading scripture because it's good for you to read. Scripture is good for you to see yourself. What is this pushing me to think? What is this showing me about myself? What are the good things that are showing me? What instincts, how do my instincts lead me to understand this passage? And that's going to come into play in the Lent study. The way that we're what our instincts are telling us about this story, because it's a terribly complicated story that's got some really amazing things. And so for next week, we're going to be talking about Jerusalem, and we're going to be looking at the Palm Sunday story, but it's really what the drama is really about Jerusalem, and we'll be talking about that next week, okay? Always, the gifts are always appreciated. Our outreach center met on, Lisa, should we tell them what the ask is going to be?
Sure, why not? Get them back.
The outreach center met on Monday night to begin to finalize what the budget will be to get this thing open by the second half of the year, by the time COVID is over, which will probably be July or August. And we just decided that we're going to need $100,000 to get this done right. So you're going to start hearing more about that. I'm not asking it from this much. I'm asking you all to figure out who you know and what you're going to be able to do to help us make that happen. But because we are committed to doing this in a way that is worthy of the people we're serving, my big joke is always, we're not going to go get Uncle Ernie's leftover carpet from his restaurant. All right, we're going to have to do this right. And so, what your gifts now are doing, and I thank you all because you've all been so faithful. What your gifts do now is you are giving us the seed money for us to go do the things that we need to do, to file things and do things. And so I really appreciate that and keeping us going. We're also going to be adding some staff in 2021. We're going to get ourselves a video service producer so that I'm not spending an entire weekend not sleeping. We're going to get that. We're going to get someone to help us with accessibility in terms of, like Edie was talking about last week. We're also going to be looking for some administrative assistance. We talked about that last week, but there are some things that we're going to be doing. And so as you all are faithful, I'm not asking you to give because you're not giving, but just reminding you that stuff's going on and things are happening. Amen.
Amen.
Next week, when Ash Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, make sure that you're taking a minute, and then we will see you on Thursday and we'll begin our Lent study. Amen. Everybody smile. Just give me one big smile. It's been a rough week. It has been a rough week for a lot of us.
It sure has.
Yeah. Dana's been through the dentist, her ordeal's over, all kinds of things. So
I ended up having to have a root canal, and my tooth was cracked, and yeah.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I love you all. I bless you all. Thank you for being part of this conversation and sorting through this. I think we're going to be revisiting these ideas maybe later in the fall when I've had more time to flush it out. I love the pushback. I love the contributions. That helps. That helps. It really does. So bless you all. And keep thinking about this. If new ideas come to mind, shoot me an email, text me, call me, something. But I think there's a way that we can think about faith at Gather that can be very compelling and welcoming to people. And that's really what we want it to be. Amen. Most holy God, we thank you for this time together. We thank you that we are not perfect, that we are hanging on the less than hope, the less than faith, because we are moving into the perfection of love. We thank you that when we look for love and perfection, what we see is ourselves imperfect, but being made whole. God, help us to love and accept ourselves for our imperfections. Help us to trust our instincts and know that not everything about it can be figured out. Warn us when our instincts lead us toward harmful behaviors and harmful attitudes. Help us respond to your spirit and faith as if it were an art. Open us up. Teach us to draw. And let us know that when we look into your story, that we should see ourselves in your story, because that's why it's been given to us. And we just are so grateful for these rich and wonderful thoughts that you have laid before us tonight. Give us some time to digest them, to wrestle with them, to push back from the table if they're too much. And we'll thank you for what we've learned and experienced and how it has drawn us all together. We ask all of this in the name of your beloved Son, the artist, Jesus. Amen. Good night, everybody. We'll see you all. Thank you, everybody. It's been great.
Good night.
Good night,
everybody. Good seeing y'all. Bye.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Take care. Take care,
Ciao.
everyone.